The late afternoon sun cast long, amber shadows across the rugged terrain of the secluded ranch, painting the landscape in shades of gold and deep violet. Inside the quiet house, the atmosphere was thick with tension, punctuated only by the rhythmic clacking of a heavy typewriter. Walter Gyan, a seasoned crime reporter turned biographer, leaned over the desk, his eyes scanning the freshly typed pages. Opposite him sat Al Felix, a man whose weathered face carried the heavy burden of a lifetime spent in the dark underbelly of the criminal world. Al Felix took a slow drag from his cigarette, the smoke curling toward the ceiling like ghostly fingers. He looked at Gyan, his voice a low, raspy rumble as he began to speak of old scores and blood debts. He brought up the name of Freddy the Horse, the notorious boss who had once commanded their old gambling operations. Gyan paused his typing, looking up with intense curiosity. Felix explained that Freddy the Horse was no more, eliminated by a ruthless man named Jim Redman. Redman had personally taken Freddy out using an ice pick, burying his body at the Carpel Off Ranch near Route 395. That brutal act was exactly how Redman had seized control of the prestigious Samovar Casino. From that power base, Redman had continued muscling in on every operation, slowly suffocating the empire that Felix had spent a lifetime to build. Felix shook his head, his eyes burning with a mixture of grief and anger. He confessed that Redman would never have achieved such immense power if he had not killed Vincent first. Vincent was Felix's beloved son. When Felix had decided to retire from the rackers, he had left everything to his son, hoping for a better future, but now the young man was dead. That devastating loss was the sole reason Felix wanted Gyan to record everything in his upcoming book, precisely as it had happened. By exposing the truth to the world, Redman would be finished, his criminal empire dismantled. Gyan nodded understandingly, rolling a fresh sheet of paper into the typewriter. He noted that one more productive session tomorrow would just about have the manuscript ready for the publisher. Felix looked out the window, his expression grim. He murmured that he did not have too many more tomorrows left. He had shared everything he knew about the mob, pouring out his darkest secrets. Suddenly, Felix froze, staring out into the dusty yard. He asked Gyan if he had ever seen the two men working outside before, the ones posing as gardeners. Gyan looked out and admitted he had never paid much attention to them. Felix, consumed by suspicion, asked Gyan to check them out immediately while he waited inside. Gyan stepped outside into the warm air, approaching the two unfamiliar men who were clumsily handling the gardening tools. He offered a polite afternoon greeting, noting that he did not remember seeing them around the property before. One of the men looked up quickly, claiming that the regular worker, Johnny, was sick and had asked them to take over the route for the day. Sensing something entirely unnatural about their presence, Gyan suggested they pack up their things and leave it until Johnny returned. The men agreed remarkably fast, thanking him before turning to depart. Back inside, Felix anxiously questioned Gyan about the encounter. Gyan explained the story about Johnny being sick, but confessed that the strange faces combined with the fact that his own trusted people in town had not returned made him highly uncomfortable. He had sent them away for peace of mind. Felix tried to calm his nerves, suggesting they relax and have a drink. Gyan smiled faintly, reminding Felix of their strict agreement not to touch any liquor until 5 o'clock. Felix joked that somewhere in this world, it had to be 5 o'clock already. Meanwhile, just beyond the perimeter of the ranch, the two false gardeners retreated toward their vehicle. They confirmed to each other that no one else appeared to be around the property. They felt confident that Sam, their inside contact, would not put them on a dangerous assignment without cause. As they surveyed the area, they spotted the thick manuscript container inside the house through the window. Believing their target was vulnerable, they moved in quickly. Chaos erupted as gunshots shattered the quiet afternoon. Felix managed to escape through the back, dodging the flying bullets. One of the hitmen swore he had hit the target twice, but upon inspecting the escape route, they found absolutely no blood on the ground, leaving them completely baffled. In the bustling city of Los Angeles, A bright and determined young woman named Monica Gideon walked into the office of the legendary private investigator, Barnaby Jones. Barnaby greeted her warmly, mentioning how kind her father had been to include his name in the acknowledgments of a previous book, recalling the time he had offered Walter some assistance with investigative procedures. Monica smiled softly, noting that her father spoke of Barnaby often. She pleaded for his help in finding him, explaining that he had completely vanished. Barnaby, maintaining his calm and grounded demeanor, gently suggested that Walter was quite famous for getting himself lost in his work and coming home whenever he felt like it. He doubted that the disappearance was malicious. Monica, however, was adamant that this time was completely different. The day before yesterday had been her 21st birthday. Her father had made an enormous deal about taking her out to dinner, calling her twice during the week to confirm her plans, yet he never showed up. Barnaby admitted that failing to show up had practically become Walter's middle name over the years, but Monica insisted he would never do that to her on such an important milestone. Her father had flown in from Kenya and Vietnam for her past birthdays. When Barnaby questioned if Walter could be working on a secret book project abroad, Monica revealed that his passport was still at his apartment, alongside all his clothes and luggage. The only item missing was his trusty typewriter. She had already checked the Sandhaven Sanitarium, every local hospital, and the jails, finding absolutely nothing. When asked about the topic of the new book, Monica explained that even her father's longtime agent, Don Proctor, had no idea. Barnaby advised her to go home and get some rest, promising to notify her the absolute minute he uncovered a lead. Across town, in a lavishly appointed office, the powerful mob boss Jim Redman was engaged in a tense telephone conversation with an associate named Victor. Redman discussed the movements of Al Felix, noting that Felix had left Arizona about 5 months ago and had been hiding in Los Angeles without anyone knowing. Redman had sent a few of his boys to arrange a friendly meeting to straighten things out, but Felix had slipped away. After hanging up, Redman turned his fury toward his henchmen, Eddie and Carl. He reprimanded them severely for blowing the opportunity when they had Felix trapped at the ranch. Carl defended himself, claiming he could not miss at that range, and reminded Redman that they at least possessed the stolen book. Redman demanded the book and flipped through the pages, pointing out that pages 33 to 41 were clearly carbon copies. This meant that Gideon had created a duplicate manuscript, which Felix undoubtedly still held. Redman emphasized that they did not have months to spare. If Felix ever delivered that completed book to a publisher, containing names, dates, illicit deals, and the exact locations where bodies were buried, their entire organization would go down together. To solve the crisis, Redman ordered his men to find Stan Lewis, a man who had been exceptionally close to Al Felix in the past, believing he was the only one who could reveal Felix's current whereabouts. Barnaby Jones began his investigation by visiting Don Proctor's literary agency. Proctor confirmed that Walter had kept the project entirely secret, only teasing that it was the hottest thing he had ever written. The landlord of Walter's apartment mentioned that the writer had barely been there for the past 4 or 5 months. Barnaby requested to see Walter's old financial records and bills, explaining that following a person's paid bills was much like following a railroad track. It could tell you exactly where someone had been and where they were heading. Barnaby discovered that Walter regularly had a specific brand of whiskey and his specialized medicine for migraine headaches delivered directly to his secret workspace. Proctor immediately directed Barnaby to the accounting department on the 2nd floor to gather the delivery addresses. In another safe house on the outskirts of the city, Al Felix was recovering from the recent ambush. Carl apologized for his absence during the attack, explaining he had been at the dentist dealing with a terrible toothache. Felix brushed it off, though the close call had shaken him deeply. Lottie, Felix's loyal companion, called them to lunch, complaining about how dull and restrictive life had become in hiding. Felix insisted they had to wait until he finished recreating the manuscript. He questioned his young nephew, Mickey, about why it took him nearly 3 hours to get a broken firing pin repaired on his .38 revolver on the very day Redman's men attacked. Mickey claimed he simply had to wait around for the gunsmith, but the explanation left Felix deeply unsettled. Barnaby's trail led him to a rural rental property owned by a man named Gabe Levins. When Barnaby arrived, Levins was terrified, mistaking him for a criminal intruder. Barnaby calmed him down, identifying himself as a private investigator looking for Walter Gideon. Levins recognized the name Fred Smith, the pseudonym used by the man who had rented the house. He confirmed that Gideon, a woman, and 2 other men had been staying there, paying 6 months of rent in advance with cash. Levins noted that the occupants had suddenly disappeared 2 days ago, leaving their meals unfinished on the table. Barnaby returned to his office to review the clues with his brilliant assistant, Betty. They managed to decipher a hidden message on a discarded typewriter ribbon that spelled out the words "on Christmas Day." The text revealed that Jim Redman had expanded his gambling profits from the Samovar Casino across the entire western region by eliminating young Vincent Felix on Christmas Day. Barnaby realized that only Al Felix could provide such explosive information. To locate the elusive Felix, Barnaby decided to seek out Stan Lewis. Barnaby met Stan Lewis at a quiet location. Stan was shocked to learn that everyone was suddenly hunting for Felix. Barnaby explained the biography project, and Stan agreed that Felix must be losing his mind to publish such dangerous secrets. Wanting to help Barnaby, Stan promised to track down Lottie's sister, who went by the name Judy Mason and worked at a bar in Torrance, believing she would know exactly where Lottie and Felix were hiding. Unfortunately, Redman's men were tracking Stan Lewis as well. Later that evening, after Stan had uncovered the location of the bar, Eddie and Carl cornered him at his apartment on West Wexler, number 60. They demanded Felix's location, but Stan refused to cooperate. By the time Barnaby arrived at the apartment 20 minutes later, he found a police lieutenant already inspecting the crime scene. Stan Lewis had been murdered. Barnaby explained to the lieutenant that Stan was helping him locate Walter Gideon, who was caught in a dangerous exposé involving Jim Redman. Barnaby immediately called Betty, instructing her to search every bar in Torrance for Judy Mason. At the new safe house, tensions were boiling over. Lottie served a meager meal, explaining that they were entirely out of groceries because no one was allowed to leave the house. Felix decided to send young Mickey to a market a couple of miles away to fetch food, ordering Carl to stay behind to guard the perimeter. Meanwhile, Barnaby located Judy Mason working at a local tavern. He informed her gently that Stan Lewis had been murdered the previous night and that her sister Lottie was in grave danger. Though Judy initially denied having a sister, the terrifying news prompted her to close the bar and make a panicked phone call to Lottie, warning her to flee the city. Barnaby and Betty successfully intercepted the telephone tones from Judy's call, using the frequencies to map out the exact telephone number and address of the safe house. Barnaby arrived at the remote location, only to be stopped at gunpoint by Felix's security men. Inside the house, Felix questioned Barnaby, who revealed that Monica had hired him. Felix's face fell as he delivered the tragic news. Walter Gideon was dead, killed during the initial ambush at the previous ranch. Before they could process the tragedy, Jim Redman and his heavily armed crew surrounded the safe house. Mickey returned from the market, but Carl noticed lipstick on the boy's collar. Felix realized that Mickey had disobeyed orders to visit his girlfriend, Samantha, who had inadvertently sold them out to Redman's men. Redman shouted through a megaphone, offering to spare their lives if they surrendered the manuscript within 1 minute, or else he would burn the house down. With the phone lines cut, Barnaby took charge of the desperate situation. He realized they needed to stall for time until the authorities arrived. Barnaby volunteered to step outside to deliver the book. He stepped into the yard, holding a thick envelope. Redman ordered him to take the manuscript out of the envelope. As Redman leaned in to look, Barnaby revealed that the envelope contained only blank papers. Before the gangsters could react, Barnaby drew his weapon, caught Redman off guard, and forced the henchmen to drop their weapons just as the police sirens wailed in the distance. Following the dramatic arrests, the police lieutenant thanked Barnaby for his spectacular work. Al Felix agreed to enter protective custody and testify before the Crime Commission, ensuring the permanent destruction of Redman's criminal empire. Back at the office, Barnaby handed Walter Gideon's typewriter to a grieving Monica. He reminded her that her father had lived his life entirely to the hilt and took great pride in her writing talents. Barnaby encouraged her to take the typewriter home and put it to good use, advising her beautiful soul that she did not have to live up to anyone else's shadow, except to be the best version of herself. Monica looked at the keys, smiled through her tears, and promised to try.